Interpolation modes allow us to adjust the way Blender animates our objects from keyframe to keyframe. So for instance, if we press 1 to go into front view, I'll turn on snapping here, press G to grab, bring this cube up, and press F to insert a keyframe, G to grab, just move it down some, F again, G to grab, move it up some, F again, insert another keyframe, G to grab, bring it back flush with the grid line, press F. And I could press G to grab and bring it down here and press F again. Or the same thing as doing that would just be to select the first keyframe, press D to duplicate it, and then click to let go of it near the indicator and it will snap to it, of course. So if we press back and press play, we now have this simple animation of the cube following a square path. And each of these keyframes represent the location, rotation, and scale of whatever objects we happen to have animated down here. So that was our part. Blender's job is to figure out everything that goes on between these keyframes that I gave to it. So as it turns out, there's actually a lot of different ways that Blender can fill in all the frames between any two given keyframes. So the way in which Blender decides how it's going to animate between this keyframe and this keyframe is by using what are called F-curves. And F just stands for function curves. So basically, what is the function in which I should, this is the question Blender is asking itself, hyperbolically speaking, what is the function I should use to fill in the frames between this keyframe? And so in short, we call those F curves. Now Blender actually has an entire editor type devoted to manipulating these F curves. So if we were to come here, we could switch this to the graph editor here. And if I were to click open this cube menu, which this is the object we happen to have animated, this cube, and click open the cube action, and then location, rotation, scale. So when I said earlier that we had created 5 keyframes, that's not entirely accurate. Now, as far as we're concerned, as far as what we need to be able to control our animations and do a lot of basic to intermediate level animation tasks, it is true. But in actuality, what was happening every time we press F or I to insert a keyframe, since our keying set is set to a location, rotation, scale here, actually a keyframe is being entered for every XYZ member of each of those things. So a keyframe for location X, a keyframe for location Y, a keyframe for location Z, and then a keyframe for rotation X, Y, Z, and I think you get the picture here. So actually, each time we're entering F, we're actually entering individual keyframes for these specific parts relative to the object's animation. This is getting a bit complicated, so don't worry about all this stuff too much. I just wanted you to be, at some level aware of kind of what's going on underneath the hood of the gutty works of Blender as we're animating. So if I go ahead and grab this little set of diagonal lines up here at the top right of this panel, we can click and drag and pull this down to split this window. And I'll switch this back to 3D view here. These individual keyframes, which are all mass entered whenever we press F or I, since we use this keying set by default, we can actually manually adjust each one of these curves to change the way that our object is animated. But as you may have guessed, that is incredibly tedious. So say for the Z location here, which is going to control up and down of a particular keyframe, and we're selected on this keyframe. So if I move the indicator down here, and we're actually on this one. So with this point selected here, I can use my mouse wheel to scroll in or scroll out to zoom in. I can hold Shift and then press on middle mouse to pan the screen around, the same way I can hold Shift and middle mouse to pan in the 3D view. But anyway, here's this point here, this keyframe that was entered. If I press G to grab and move it around, you can see how this is adjusting this particular frame here. Actually, as I move it right, you can see the actual key down in the dope sheet. You can see it moving right and left, up and down, controlling the height value. And then of course we can select these individual handles and do stuff to it. So you could, if you're doing a really, really precise animation and you're really deep into the gutty works of it, you may want to, adjust these curves manually. And of course, this changes our animation. So if we press back and press play, once it gets near this frame, it's, going to do some weird stuff because we adjusted that curve. Okay, so finally to the title of the video. the title of the video. Finally to the title of the video. Interpolation modes. What is an interpolation mode? Interpolation modes do these kind of adjustments for us automatically. So they're a kind of different presets you can use to change all these curves all at once to do special kind of tasks. So I'll just leave this graph editor open so you can see kind of how when we change these different interpolation modes, it's affecting these function curves. That is the math being used to decide how these frames should be animated between any two given keyframes. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this up because we don't really need to look at all that while we're doing this. So here are our curves, and with all this stuff selected here, we can change the interpolation mode of any selection of keyframes. So right now we have everything selected by pressing this little button here next to our auto keyframe recording button. So if I press here, I can select keyframe interpolation. Now this has three different menus, one called interpolation, one easing by strength, and one dynamic effects. But these are all basic interpolation modes. So if I press constant, notice how my curves have now changed to look extremely rigid, and if we press play, notice that the cube doesn't appear to move until each keyframe is actually hit. You can imagine this would be cool for like a ticking clock or different mechanical things, stuff like that. So we could click here, change this to linear, which this will cause this animation to play out with absolutely zero easing. So it's just going straight through the gambit of the motions very robotically, which a lot of times that's really what you want. And then next we have Bezier, which you can see a nice curve is produced around these curves, and we have these handles we can use to adjust these individual keyframes and so forth. And this is the default method. And so when we press play here, notice how there's a bit of slowing down and a bit of speeding up as the indicator gets to each frame and then heads toward a new one. So this gives us, by default, the traditional easy in, easy out kind of keyframe easing with the Bezier curves, which is very useful. Okay, I'm going to press A to select all of these. We click here, then we have easing we can set, which you can kind of get an idea the way in which these different effects are going to work based on the way the little curve looks. It's a little icon. Once you get used to recognizing the difference between F curves and stuff, so we can click this one. We can see how this is going to adjust this. So you can imagine after looking at the way it affects these curves that it's going to kind of like slow down, then speed up really quick, and then come to a very rigid stop and then keep moving. So if we press play, notice it does just that. It goes kind of like it's coming to a like dead halt and then starting up again. And then we have quadratic here, which is very similar to that. Of course, you're going to notice, different effects when you have things animated in different ways. So for instance, we're not even rotating this or moving it out of the y-axis plane. You can see our little gizmo saying this way is the y direction, and we're not moving like that. So yeah, so you'll notice different things when animating differently. But then we have cubic, which is doing something similar again. Quartic. It's an interesting word. These seem to be basically more intense versions of the same kind of pattern here as we're looking at this, but I'm sure there's like subtle differences that you could discover by testing different kind of animations. Quintic. Yeah, this one seems to be the most hardcore of those. Okay, so we got exponential here. An exponential increase, of course, is just each value multiplied by itself. So as you can see, it's doing so with each of these curves. The height is starting out 1 plus 1 is 2, and then 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 4 is 16, and then 16 times 16 way higher. The exponential value is all about starting out really slow and then a huge increase because it's multiplying by itself. And you're definitely probably going to notice a difference in these interpolation types when you're working with rigs and animating characters and stuff too. And then we have circular, which we can see how this bends the curve out there and bends it out like that, which is nice. See the way this is working with the animation there. And on to our dynamic effects. These can give us some like really nice stylistic effects. So if we try the back one, you can see how that adjusted the curves there. And you can see that it actually kind of like Bugs Bunny sliding into home plate kind of effect, kind of a cartoony like, whoa, hold on a second, and then going a little bit past where it was supposed to stop and then holding back and going on, which is cool. And then bounce, we can see how that adjusted our curves there. And this gives us a very like knocking into something effect, or bounce in other words. Kind of a cool slam effect there. And then finally elastic, which this is definitely the most aggressive of changes to our F curves. These functions are like super crazy here. So let's press play. And we'll see that, yeah, this thing wobbling like jello at each keyframe, which is pretty sweet. So of course, once you add these effects, you can always go back and manually adjust these curves as well. If you want to, you can do all the major kind of transform stuff. So I can press B to do a border select over these keyframes of this F curve, press R to rotate, S to scale, that kind of stuff. If you ever dive into the graph editor here for animation stuff, just be aware of that. But we're not going to stay too much more in here. I just want you to have at least a simple understanding of what's going on under the hood as we're using these tools here. So you can see how we kind of crazily adjusted this animation here by rotating that stuff. So now that we have a pretty general understanding of what's going on here, I'm going to go ahead and click this little icon at the bottom left of any given editor type here in Blender, this little diagonal line at the bottom. And this lets us click and drag and join a window such as that. And I'm going to go ahead and press X to delete that cube, press Shift A and add another default cube here, and press back on my animation timeline there. I'm going to click back on my Sensei tab so I have all my nice builder tools to work with here, and press Alt and tap middle mouse to zoom in on my selection. So now with our new knowledge of interpolation modes, let's make some stuff. What I want to do is actually make a clock. So first I'm going to start with the big hand with this cube. I'm going to press S to scale, middle mouse to constrain, and just drag this towards this way. Then I'm going to press tab to go into edit mode and select this top face here. Press space if you're not already using face selection. Press G to grab, middle mouse to constrain. And maybe scale this down or something like this. Let's see, maybe scale that a bit. I've just got this kind of clock hand. Maybe I'll grab this top face and E to extrude, S to scale, E to extrude, E to extrude again, S to scale, and then give it some kind of little head there. Press tab to exit edit mode, and maybe press bevel to give it some nice smooth shading. Okay, so we've got a clock hand. I'm going to go ahead and in my outliner rename it. We'll just call this big hand. Press enter there. And so what we would like to do is animate this tick-tocking around. So what we're going to do is press F to insert a keyframe. Now if I press 1 to go into front view, and then R to rotate and hold Control to constrain the angle so it does perfect, and I go exactly one full rotation and press F again, then I've animated this spinning around in a full circle here. But another way we can do this, and say we wanted this to spin around a certain amount of times or something, so if I were to click this new keyframe I added, press X to delete it, with our indicator down on the first second so we're not copying over our first keyframe, click on the Dimensions tab here, figure out which direction we want to go, which, okay, turns out to be Y, but if that wasn't it, we could, press these until we figure out which direction we wanted it to go. I'll press Control Z to undo all that, and make sure this is on 1 second here. So here, I can manually enter 360 degrees if I want. And then of course, if I wanted it to do more than that, I would just multiply that number. So if I wanted it to spin twice, it would be 360 times 2, 700, 720, that's right. And we'll press F to insert a keyframe, or we could press I, and now this will spin twice all the way around. But we only want it to spin once, so we'll drop that down to 360, hit enter, press F again to record over that keyframe. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this up because I don't need it open right now. So this is nice, but it's not very tick-tocky, which is what we want to make it. So to make it tick-tocky, we need to change the interpolation mode. Come down here and press A to select all my keyframes, and press my button here, which displays keyframe interpolation. And the one that makes it tick-tocky is the constant. So basically, it makes it appear as though no in-between animation is being done, just only the main keyframes show. That's constant here. Only if we were to press constant right now, what would happen is, because no animation is done between keyframes, since the first keyframe here and the second keyframe here look exactly the same, if we change it to constant right now, it's just going to basically look like nothing's happening at all, because we'll see this keyframe and it will stay the same until it gets to here where it looks like this again. And so none of this animating will be done. So to adjust this interpolation mode where we can see the tick-tockiness, we need to click on our animation tab, and under our extended tools, what we can do is press this fill button. And when we press fill, it will generate keyframes between any two keyframes you happen to have selected for every frame in between. And then that will give us the stuff we need to work with to get the tick-tocky effect we want, so it doesn't just look like it's just standing still the entire time. So we need some filler stuff in there. So let's press fill. And now if we scroll in with our mouse wheel onto here, we can see that these keyframes have been generated from frame 0 to the first second, which is 30 frames later. So if we press play now, it looks like the same smooth animation, but now that we have stuff to actually work with, let's click on here and change this to constant. And if we press play, it's still going to look exactly smooth because there's a keyframe for every single frame. So what we can do is press S to scale, and of course your keyframe selection will scale from wherever your indicator happens to be, which it's at 0, so it's all scaling, from this orange indicator here. And we can drag this out, and if we were to bring this up to 2 seconds instead of 1, then now Blender is back to having to fill in the keyframe animation with the F-curves between each of these keyframes. And since these keyframes are all set to constant, their curves are very flat and straight, so there's not going to be any change, as you can see here, until we get to each keyframe. So now we have a very tick-tocky tick-tock. So let's press play, and we can begin to see that tick-tockiness. If we stretch this animation out even longer, we'll see it even more so. So if we click here, back to 0, so it will all scale from this 0 keyframe, press S to scale, and say drag it out to twice that, say to 4 seconds here, and press play. We can see it now much more tick-tocky. But let's go ahead and let's drag it out to 8. Then it will be super tick-tocky. So we can now have this much more tick-tocky animation here of these even intervals. So I'm not entirely sure why, but between the first and the second keyframe, it is not super tick-tocky. So I'm going to select this second keyframe and press X to delete it, and press B to do a border select all of these. And then I want to drag my cursor to this quarter second here, but since the cursor snapping for the animation timeline here is set to half-second intervals, which you can set it here, so snap increment of half second, we could set this to 1/4 second, or you can just hold Alt and right-click to temporarily disable cursor snapping and just drag it there manually. And then we can press G to grab this big selection of keyframes here and just let go of it near our timeline indicator, and it will snap to that. So when we first filled this animation of this rotation of this big hand here, we only did it for 1 second, which we're set to 30 frames per second, so it gave us 30 frames basically. Of course, if you were trying to be like super realistic, you could have just made the first keyframe at 0 seconds and the second keyframe at 2 seconds, which would be 60 total frames, and then this would be spread out amongst 60 clicks. So basically you would have exactly 60 intervals. But I'm not going for hyper realism today, basically just a fun little clock thing. Okay, so we've got this nice big hand here. which ticks. That's very cool, looks very clock-like. So now we need a little hand. So if I were to press D to duplicate this hand here, hold middle mouse to drag it out. So say I wanted it to be like this. So now we have two objects down here in the animation area. We have our big hand and this big hand 0.001, which is a 0.00, and then a number gets added whenever you duplicate something. So we could go ahead and rename this to little hand, because that's what's going to be. We're going to change it in a second. So in the past, if you're ever fooling around with animation, you may have noticed that whenever you duplicate an object with keyframes that you've animated, such as this little hand we just duplicated here, and you press play, it appears that no longer two objects anymore. What's happened? Well, what's actually happening is that the little hand is at the exact location of the big hand, because it has the exact keyframes of the big hand, which part of those keyframes contain information about the location. And so what that means is when each keyframe is being executed, this little hand object, which has all the exact same keyframes, its information about the location on each keyframe is exactly the same as the object it was duplicated from. And thus, when the animation starts, it is sent to the exact location. So it appears as though there's only one object. But if we were to come here in our outliner and say hide the little hand here, we can still see the big hand's there, or hide the big hand, we can still see the little hand is there, because they're just in the same location. So what we need to do is get rid of the location keyframes from the little hand, and that way we can put it wherever we want without it using that same location information at each keyframe. So what we do is make sure we have the little hand selected, and under our extended tools here in our animation tab, we just picked which set of keyframes we want to get rid of. So we want to get rid of the location keyframes that are duplicated from the big hand one, so they're not snapping to the same location. So I'll delete location. And now if we go back and with the little hand selected here, press G to grab and bring it out here. Now if we press play, it's no longer being snapped to the same location. So it stays where I tell it to, which is good. So if I were to press G to grab and move it over here or something and we press play, it's staying put where I put it, which is what we want. So I'll press pause and go back here, and then press Control Z to move it back to that location, and press back to reset the animation there. Okay, so now that it's not going to hop to the wrong location, let's press Tab to go into edit mode and make this smaller. So I'm going to press Z to do wireframe selection and B to do border select, and grab this, press G to grab, middle mouse to constrain, and just, to bring this down to make a smaller hand here. And press Z to go back into solid viewport shading. And that looks about fine. Let's press Tab to go back into object mode, S to scale, middle mouse to constrain. Maybe additionally make this a bit, thinner by pulling this in and, set it to something like that. Maybe make that head a little smaller too. So S to scale, maybe make it just a little bit smaller in addition to being lower there. And bring that up just a little. Okay. Something like that. That's fine for our little hand. Also, I think I'll go ahead and turn on my high def shading feature. So if we head over to the Sensei tab and under the builder options here, if we click our options and select high def shading, this just turns on a bunch of different settings for us so we can see things a bit better, and it's a bit more enjoyable to model here in the 3D view. So I'll switch back to the animation tab, and right now if we press play, okay, so it's nice that the location isn't being messed up, but we need these to spin at different intervals. So to do that, on the little hand, what we want to do is right click to bring our indicator back to 0. So this will scale towards this. And then if we press S to scale and bring this down to about 4 seconds, then we have divided the time this animation is going by 2. So if we press play, we'll see this is now spinning much faster than the original hand there. But we want it to keep spinning while this one is spinning. So what we'll do is duplicate these keyframes so the animation of the little hand lasts the same amount of time as the big hand. So with all these selected, press D to duplicate, and we can just drop it there. And of course it's going to snap to our timeline indicator. So let's move that so it doesn't snap, and press G to grab, Of course, we don't really need this first keyframe because it's going to look exactly the same as the last one because that's the position it was, so we just want it to copy over it. So to do that, we're just going to set it right on top of the old one. And so now it shouldn't, skip a beat. It should just go straight to going like that. And so if we press back, press play, we've got our big hand spinning and our little hand spinning. So the little hand spins twice and the big hand goes one rotation. So at any point, if we wanted to get rid of the interpolation effects of any of these keyframes, we can just select which keyframes we want to go back to normal. So say we wanted all these little hand keyframes to not use the constant interpolation mode, which we had set here. So to reset these, we can just press clean. And so if I were to press back and press play here, this is now going to smooth with the regular Bezier curve, while the original one still uses the Bezier curve. And actually we have some crazy flapping going on there. Not sure what's going on there. We can single in on a specific object's animation if we want by pressing this little mouse arrow button. And then this will make it to where only the keyframes of whatever we have selected will display. So we can maybe try to figure out what's going on right around here where this thing goes wonky. And looks like from here, it's going all the way around entirely, which is not good. And we actually don't notice that when it's set to constant, but we can notice it now that we've reset the keyframes, which this cleans them and resets them to Bezier curve, which is the default interpolation mode. Well, if we were going to use Bezier curves, in any case, we wouldn't need all these keyframes. We would just need a keyframe for each rotation. So since we're not doing that, we're not going to, worry about whatever happened there when we were copying and pasting these. And I'm going to click here and return this to constant because that's what we're doing anyway. But just know that you can reset the keyframes by pressing clean here if you need to do so. So I'm going to turn off my individual animation display thing so I can see all the stuff I have animated again. And let's add a back to this clock. So I'm going to press Shift A and under Mesh, add a cylinder. Press 1 to go into front view. And double tap space to bring up my tool operator menu and press align to view. And then of course you could get to that by pressing this if you wanted to instead, but I don't like having this thing displayed all the time. It eats up too much space. And then so now if we go like this, and I'm not sure why aligning that to view did that to the animation, but if we press back, it will go to normal. Press S to scale this, middle mouse to constrain, G to grab, bring it out, and S to scale it up some. Bring it out some, S to scale, something, we're going to need this to be quite a bit bigger, maybe something like that, S to scale, and actually this is the back here where the big hand is. Let's press W, well it's 3 times so it will render at 3 times the smoothing, but let's drop the view down to 2 so it doesn't eat up too much space while we're working. Press tab to go into edit mode, make sure we're in face selection and select this face here, press E to extrude, S to scale so we can smooth this out, E to extrude, S to scale again, and do the same thing here, E to extrude, S to scale, E to extrude, S to scale, so we're kind of hiding those rigid lines created by this unruly ingon here. And then we can Alt select this top loop of faces here, press E to extrude, and this gives us a nice kind of rigid back for this. And let's press tab to go into object mode, S to scale, middle mouse to constrain, maybe bring this out a bit like this. And let's press tab to go into edit mode and maybe press E to extrude, S to scale, S to scale, middle mouse to constrain. So we've got something like this. Maybe scale this out a bit more and Alt select this loop of faces here, press E to extrude, Shift scroll up for edge selection, Alt select this loop of edges here, press G to grab, maybe bring that out something like this, and maybe add another edge loop by pressing Shift W here to tighten that up a bit. Alt select this loop of faces here, Shift Alt select to select this loop of faces here. By the way, I press space for face selection. Then Alt-Shift select these to add this, Alt-Shift select to add this. Actually, we're not going to need this one selected, so Alt-Shift to deselect this inner loop, G to grab, middle mouse to constrain, and just bring that in some like this. Okay, that's looking more clockish. So we could add some numbers to this. Right-click over here, and then press Shift-A, and click Text to add a text here. Press 1 to go into front view. Double tap space again, press Align to View so we can get this to stand up straight here. And it looks like our clock is backwards from front views. So what I'm going to do is actually parent these animated hands to this back of this clock. And something really cool happens whenever we parent animated stuff to something else. And it gives us a lot of control over how we can position those animated things, even if they do have keyframes for location. Shift select these two hands. Finally, Shift select the object I want to parent, which is this clock. And under my Sensei tab here, press Parent. And now, however I move this parented object, the animated things will move along without giving us any trouble. So if we were to press play, we can see the hands going here, but I could press G to grab and move this clock now, or R to rotate it. And notice that the animation doesn't give us any trouble. It just sticks exactly to the way we want it to, which is good. So I'll press right click to cancel that movement. And what I want to do is press 5 to go into top view and R to rotate just the clock. We don't have to worry about selecting the hands or anything. Hold Control to constrain and rotate this around. So now when we press 1 to go into front view, we're looking at this how we expect it to be when we're in front view. So pretty sweet. You can actually see there's a bit of a hesitation there in the second spinning of the little hand. So let's see if we can get rid of that by zooming in. And this is happening, let's see, right here at this keyframe at 4 seconds there. So let's click this one and maybe we can delete that keyframe, see what happens there. Press play. And it's still stopping. So what we would need to do is press B to do a border select and press G to grab and just move these right down here. And that accidentally snapped to my cursor, so I press Control Z to undo that, and make sure this isn't going to snap to my cursor by dragging the cursor over here or something. Press G to grab and bring it there. And so now when we press play, there's no awkward kind of pausing there, which is good. Okay, so let's throw some numbers on there. So to do that with our text we have over here, we just select the text and we can press Tab to go into edit mode, which allows us to change the text. Also, you can see this, button here for doing that thing. Just in case you forget you need to press Tab to edit this, we could press backspace. And so rather than adding all 12 numbers to this, I'm just going to add 4. So we'll have, well, why don't we go ahead and do Roman numerals. So I'll press I to make 1, and then 3 I's to make the for 3, and then VI to make 6, and then IV for Roman numeral 9, and then XII for Roman numeral 12, and then so we'll just have this. Well, I don't actually need the 1 there, but we'll have 12, and then 3, 6, and 9. Sort of like a clock. So let's left arrow click back here and get rid of the 1 because we don't need that. And then we can press Tab to go back into object mode. We could press S to scale these up a bit. Under geometry here, and I'll close up the font, we can extrude these to make it nice and 3D. And don't want to extrude it too much, so something like that maybe. And then we can increase the depth of these, which is basically like the bevel width, essentially, and then increase the resolution, which is how many times they are beveled. So we'll make that to about 4, do something like that, nice and smooth there. Maybe scale these a bit. What we want to do is convert these to a mesh. So to do that, press Tab to go into edit mode, and we'll see this nice convert to mesh button. Press that, and then they're converted to mesh. That's good. Press Tab to go back into object mode. Now that they're mesh, we can separate them. Press separate, Now that they're all separated, let's B to do a border select and join the ones we want joined. So let's join the 3, B to select these, and then we're going to have to shift select one of them so that it becomes active and press join there. B to select these and shift select one so it becomes active and press join. B to select these and shift select one of them so it becomes the active one and press join. And so now we've got these numbers here. So let's press 1 to go into front view and select the 12 one, and let's move it to where it would go there, and then select 3, which would go over to the right here about, and then 6, the VI, we'll just grab that and it would go down here at the bottom, and then 9 would go over here to the left there about. Shift select all these here, and then press 3 to go into right view, G to grab, and let's bring them in so they are inside of the actual face there. And then what we can do with all these selected is shift select the main clock thing, which let's go ahead and change this from cylinder to, let's call this clock. And let's go ahead and rename these to VI. Double click this to rename 9 to IV. And double click this one, which is 12, which we rename to XII, which is its Roman numeral 12. And then double click the 3 and just rename that to III for the 3. Okay, so we've got all these. We can shift select all 4 of these, and then finally shift select the clock and press parent. Now they're all parented, so whenever we select the clock, all the hands and the numbers and everything will move with the clock. So that's good. So right click to cancel that movement there. Okay, so to style up our clock just a little bit more, I think I'm going to add some cutouts to it. And to do that, I'm going to use my shape tools here, and I'm going to add a cylinder, and I'm going to press 1 to go into front view, double tap space, and press align to view. Press S to scale here. And I think what I want to do is add a cutout of a moon and a sun. So to create the cutout of the moon, I've got this cylinder here. What I'm going to do is G to grab, move it over a bit. I'm going to press D to duplicate this, and G to grab like this to pull it out. Then I'm going to press cut out, press S to scale, middle mouse to constrain. So we've got this kind of moon shape here. Press apply there. And then what we can do is scale that and press G to grab and bring that in here. Maybe scale that a bit down, something like that. And S to scale, and we'll cut that out in just a second. But let's make a sun also. To make a sun, I think I'll also add another cylinder. Press 1 to go into front view, double tap space, and press align to view. Or you could just rotate it manually, doesn't really matter. And this will be our kind of sun shape here. So to add some flare to our sun, we'll press G to grab, move it out, S to scale, make it a bit smaller. And let's press tab to go into edit mode. Then we want to alt select this loop of faces around here. But we want to make sure that the caps, the circles at the end and the beginning of the cylinder are not selected. And then under select here, I'm going to press checker deselect, which will deselect everything in a checkered fashion. So now we only have every other face selected here, which is nice. Then we could press Control E to do an individual extrusion, something like this. Then we could switch our pivot point to individual origins, press S to scale to kind of scale these all to some kind of like sun ray point there. And then switch this back to medium point, press S to scale them out like that. Okay, and then tab to go back into object mode, S to scale, 1 to go into front view. And so maybe bring this in like here, S to scale it out, something like this. So we've got this kind of sun shape and this moon shape. Make sure both of these extend through the back and the front. So then what I'm going to do is press cut out, and this cuts out a sun shape into my clock, and I'll press apply, then select my moon and press cut out, and that cuts out that shape. Maybe scale it up a little bit. Press 1 to go into front view. Maybe I want to bring this over by pressing G to grab, middle mouse to constrain, bring it over a bit, then press apply. And so now I have this kind of cool sun and moon shapes here in my clock. And so if we press back and press play, we've got these clock hands going. Only they're going in the wrong direction. If you wanted to switch them around, you could just press A to select all the animated keyframes. And in our animation tab, I think the reason why these are going this way now, I forgot, when we mirrored the clock because it wasn't facing forward in the front view, it reversed also the animation of the hands. So with all these selected here in our extended tools, we can press reverse, and this reverses our keyframes. So now if we press play, they'll all go in the proper direction, which is good. Okay, so watching this animation playback, I realized something really dumb I did, and that is make the little hand go faster than the big hand, which is traditionally not the way that clock hands work. But no worries, we can fix that. All we have to do is copy the keyframes from the big hand and paste them to the little hand and vice versa. So to do that, what we do first is we make sure only what is selected is what we want to be copied. So I first select a frame on this big hand to deselect all the other stuff, and then press B to do a border select to select these big hand keyframes. And then we want to press this copy selected keyframes button here. So we'll press that. And to paste them is a little tricky. When we're pasting them, there's a few things we have to remember. It has to be onto something that already at least has one keyframe, such as this little hand one, which does. And only that item can be displayed in the dope sheet when you're pasting them, else they'll be pasted to everything. So we make sure that this display only selected is turned on, and it's working because we have both these clock hands selected. So those are the only things being displayed in the dope sheet area. But then we want to select the little hand because we just copied the frames from the big hand. We want to paste them here. But before we paste them, we need to select all the frames from the little hand because we're going to want to transfer those over to the big hand and move them out of the way so they don't get accidentally copied over. So let's move them way down here. And now let's right mouse click to drag the timeline back to 0. And now we can press paste keyframes. And these keyframes from the big hand are now on the little hand. Okay, so now that we got those, we can press B to do a border select and get all of these keyframes to put them onto the big hand, which will be going faster. And so we want to first copy them by pressing this button or Control C. And then we can press X to delete these because we no longer need them on here. And then click on the big hand. And we can press X to delete these because we've already transferred them to the little hand. Press X. Only if we try to paste them now, it won't work because the object needs at least one keyframe in there. So just press F to give it a generic keyframe. And now we can press paste or Control V. And so now when we press play, we've got the little hand going slower and the big hand going faster, as clocks will traditionally do.